Senator John Kennedy believed he could pressure the new Congresswoman with his relaxed Southern charm and sharp legal background. The 72-year-old Republican from Louisiana had challenged countless witnesses in committee hearings using his signature humor and Oxford-trained intellect. But when he attempted to corner 43-year-old Jasmine Crockett during a House Judiciary Committee meeting, he didn't realize what was about to happen. What unfolded in the next 60 seconds left Kennedy completely silent, and may have pushed Crockett into national attention for good. The Texas Democrat didn't just defend her position. She delivered a response so direct and so precisely timed that even some Republicans in the room acknowledged the impact. Before we break down this notable exchange, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss key political moments. You'll want to see every detail of what Jasmine Crockett said to John Kennedy. The hearing room suddenly grew quiet. Kennedy, who had been leaning back with his usual confident expression, sat upright. His expression shifted from amused to surprised in an instant. Even Chairman Jim Jordan, who rarely loses control of a hearing, appeared taken aback by the exchange. This wasn't just a routine political disagreement. It was a clear generational contrast that showed how the new wave of leaders approaches these debates. And John Kennedy experienced that shift firsthand. To understand why this moment carried so much weight, it helps to know who these two figures are, and why this type of confrontation was always likely. John Kennedy is not the average Southern politician. Yes, he speaks with a Louisiana accent and uses familiar expressions, but that doesn't reflect his academic depth. He graduated from Vanderbilt, earned a law degree from the University of Virginia, and completed a Bachelor of Civil Law at Oxford University. He has spent decades in public service, including years as Louisiana's state treasurer before becoming a U.S. Senator in 2017. Kennedy built his reputation by challenging witnesses during hearings. His strength lies in taking complicated legal issues and reducing them to simple, pointed questions that often leave people struggling to respond. He has made Supreme Court nominees uncomfortable, put CEOs on the spot, and turned many hearings into widely shared moments with his quick remarks. His colleagues respect his legal ability, even when they differ with him politically. He is that unique mix of intelligence and everyday charm that allows him to make opponents appear unprepared. When Kennedy focuses on someone during a hearing, most expect a tough exchange. But Jasmine Crockett is not like most. The 43-year-old Texas Democrat entered Congress in 2023 with a level of intensity that stood out. She is not just another lawmaker. She is a civil rights attorney who spent years arguing cases before bringing that same determination to the House of Representatives. Crockett grew up in St. Louis, earned her law degree from the University of Houston Law Center, and built her career advocating for people who couldn't defend themselves. She worked on voting rights cases, opposed discriminatory practices, and became known as someone who never hesitates to confront powerful opponents. When she won her seat representing Texas's 30th congressional district, Crockett made it clear she wasn't arriving in Washington to blend in. She came to advocate for her constituents and challenge a system that had overlooked voices like theirs for far too long. It didn't take her colleagues long to realize she wasn't someone who could be pressured by seniority or long-standing traditions. What made this confrontation predictable was how different these two figures are. Kennedy reflects an older political style, experienced, measured, and reliant on charm and legal knowledge to maintain influence. Crockett symbolizes a newer approach, direct, passionate, and unafraid to call out inconsistent behavior even when the room becomes tense. The House Judiciary Committee had been tense all morning as they debated voting rights legislation, an issue especially meaningful to Crockett because of her civil rights background. Kennedy was offering his usual arguments about states' rights and concerns about federal overreach, using his familiar approach to portray Democratic positions as excessive. But this time, the atmosphere felt different. The tension grew each time Kennedy spoke, especially as he continued using a tone that implied he understood the subject better than everyone else. Crockett had been listening carefully and taking notes, and those familiar with her could see she was preparing for the right moment. The stakes went beyond a single hearing. This was about respect, about who gets to guide the conversation, and about whether the newer generation of leaders would allow themselves to be spoken down to by the more established figures. Both Kennedy and Crockett knew that millions would eventually watch the clips, and both understood that this exchange could shape their national reputations. Kennedy had just wrapped up a long statement arguing that federal voting rights laws were unnecessary and that states could address these issues independently. He was comfortable discussing constitutional principles and legal precedent, clearly confident in his presentation. That's when he miscalculated. Instead of shifting to the next topic, Kennedy targeted Crockett directly. Perhaps he assumed she would be easy to dismiss, a freshman member who wouldn't challenge a senior senator. Or perhaps he leaned on his record of using credentials and experience to pressure others. Whatever his reasoning, he was about to discover that Crockett does not back down easily. The entire committee room prepared to witness the moment when Kennedy's confidence met Crockett's resolve. The tension in the Judiciary Committee room remained noticeable. Chairman Jim Jordan attempted to keep the discussion focused, but it was clear a confrontation was building. Kennedy was present as an expert witness on constitutional law, and he was clearly enjoying the chance to demonstrate his knowledge. Kennedy leaned forward, adjusted his glasses, and offered what he viewed as a decisive critique. His voice carried a slow, deliberate tone often used to unsettle witnesses. "Ms. Crockett," he began, using a tone similar to that of a teacher correcting a student, "I appreciate your passion. I truly do. But passion without understanding is simply noise. I've been studying constitutional law since before you were born, and what you're suggesting today shows a basic misunderstanding of how our federal system functions." Some Republicans nodded in agreement. A few staffers began taking notes, sensing the moment might gain online attention. Kennedy relied on his age, background, and experience to assert authority. "You see," Kennedy continued, fully adopting a professor-like posture, "when you've been in this field as long as I have, when you've practiced law the way I have, you realize these issues aren't as simple as younger members tend to think." The condescending tone was clear. Even some Republicans appeared uneasy. Democrats exchanged glances, frustrated but unsure how to respond without appearing disrespectful toward a senior senator. Crockett remained still, pen in hand. Observers noticed her jaw tighten slightly, a familiar reaction from her days in court whenever an opponent underestimated her. Kennedy went on. "Now, I don't mean any disrespect, Ms. Crockett," he said, "but when you've graduated from Oxford, when you've served in the Louisiana legislature, when you've practiced constitutional law for decades like I have, then you'll understand why your proposal raises serious concerns." Then Kennedy made the misstep that shifted the entire exchange. Rather than stopping at his critique, he made it personal. "I mean, let's be honest here," he added, leaning back with the confident expression he was known for. Kennedy leaned back and said, "You're a freshman congresswoman from Texas who spent your time doing small-scale civil rights work. That's admirable. It truly is. But it's not the same as understanding constitutional law at the federal level." The room went completely silent. Even the usual shuffling of papers stopped. Kennedy had crossed a line seasoned politicians know to avoid. He had dismissed not just Crockett's argument, but her entire career and qualifications. What he didn't realize was that he had chosen the worst possible approach with the worst possible person. Jasmine Crockett had spent years confronting this exact type of attitude. She had dealt with opposing counsel who believed their prestigious backgrounds made them superior. She had stood before judges who questioned whether a black woman from Texas belonged in their courtroom. But this wasn't a courtroom with a judge she had to defer to. This was a congressional hearing, where she held equal authority, and Kennedy had made the exchange personal. Crockett looked up from her notes for the first time since he began speaking. The cameras captured the moment clearly. Her expression stayed calm and steady, but there was something in her eyes that signaled trouble for Kennedy. "Senator Kennedy," she said quietly, her tone controlled and precise, "I appreciate you sharing your resume with us. That's helpful context." Kennedy smiled, thinking he had succeeded. He had no idea what was coming next. "But since we're discussing qualifications and experience," Crockett continued, still composed, "let me make sure I understand your point correctly." She lifted a folder from her desk, a folder that later would be revealed to contain research prepared by her staff on Kennedy's own record. Members on the Democratic side leaned forward, sensing a shift. "You're suggesting that my work as a civil rights attorney handling voting rights cases in federal court does not qualify me to understand voting rights legislation. Is that correct?" Kennedy nodded, still self-assured. "Well, I'm saying there's a difference between local advocacy and understanding constitutional principles at the federal level." "I understand," Crockett replied. "And you're saying this because you yourself have extensive experience with voting rights cases, among other things." "Yes," Kennedy answered. That's when Crockett opened the folder. The camera focused on her face, and for the first time since Kennedy started speaking, she smiled, though not warmly. What followed would be replayed millions of times online. Crockett had done what skilled attorneys do: allow their opponent to build the framework of their own mistake. Kennedy had presented himself as the expert, dismissed her background, and emphasized his superior knowledge. Now, she was going to use all of that against him. Republicans on the committee began to shift in their seats. They could feel the tone changing, even if they didn't yet understand why. Chairman Jim Jordan attempted to interrupt and move to the next topic, but Crockett continued. Senator Kennedy, she said, now with the firm authority she learned in years of courtroom work, since you've established yourself as the expert on constitutional law and voting rights, I'm sure you can clarify something for us. Kennedy nodded again, unaware he was stepping into a trap. Can you tell us about your record on voting rights cases? Specifically, how many voting rights cases you have actually argued in federal court? The question hung in the air. Kennedy's smile began to fade as he realized what she was doing, but it was already too late. The moment had arrived. The senator who appeared confident seconds earlier now looked unsettled, like someone who suddenly understood he had walked into a problem of his own making. His hesitation told everyone that Crockett had struck a direct and effective point. Kennedy cleared his throat, trying to buy time. Well, my experience with constitutional law is broader than just voting rights cases specifically, he said slowly. But Crockett wasn't going to let the moment pass. She had spent too many years in courtrooms to let a witness avoid a direct question. I didn't ask about your broad background, Senator, she said. I asked specifically about voting rights cases in federal court. How many have you argued? The cameras captured every shift in Kennedy's expression. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by the look of someone who understood he was in real trouble. Republican members shifted uncomfortably. Even Chairman Jordan appeared uneasy. Crockett didn't wait for Kennedy to continue hesitating. She glanced at her folder and delivered the statement that would end his control of the exchange. Let me help you, Senator, since you seem to be having difficulty recalling your voting rights experience. According to public records, you have argued exactly 0 federal voting rights cases. 0. The impact was immediate. Democrats tried to hide their reactions. A few staffers in the back couldn't conceal their smiles. Republicans looked like they wished they weren't in the room. But Crockett wasn't finished. She knew that once you establish the truth, you don't step back from it. Now, since you raised the issue of qualifications, she continued, let me share mine. I have personally argued 14 federal voting rights cases. 14. I've won jury verdicts protecting voting access. I've argued before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I've spent the last 15 years doing the exact work we're discussing today. The difference between them could not have been clearer. Kennedy had spent the last 10 minutes emphasizing experience and credentials, but had no practical background in the very field he claimed expertise in. Crockett, whom he had described as handling small-time civil rights work, had extensive federal court experience. Kennedy attempted to recover. Well, my constitutional law experience is broader. Crockett cut in, her tone now carrying full authority. With respect, Senator, you just spent 10 minutes telling this committee that my experience wasn't relevant because it was small-time civil rights work. Yet that supposedly small-time work includes more federal voting rights experience than you have. The silence that followed was heavy. Kennedy, known for making others look unprepared with sharp questioning, had been outmaneuvered by someone he assumed would be easy to dismiss. But Crockett had one more point prepared. She lifted another document from her folder, research compiled by her staff for this exact moment. And Senator, since you mentioned your educational background, and it is impressive, I want to be sure the record is complete. Kennedy's expression tightened. He didn't know what was coming, but he understood it would not help his argument. You graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law in 1977. That was 47 years ago. In that time, voting rights law has changed significantly. The Voting Rights Act has been amended. Supreme Court rulings have reshaped the field. New, modern challenges have emerged. She paused, allowing the timeline to register before continuing. Meanwhile, I graduated from law school in 2006 and have been actively practicing voting rights law ever since. So while I respect your background, Senator, when it comes to current voting rights issues, the law as it stands today, and what actually works in federal court, my experience may be more relevant than yours. The shift in the room was unmistakable. Kennedy, who had entered the exchange presenting himself as the seasoned expert correcting a younger colleague, now looked like someone who had been corrected by the very person he underestimated. His usual wit was gone. His familiar charm wasn't there to help him. He made one final attempt to regain footing. "Miss Crockett, I think you're missing the broader constitutional principles." "No, Senator," Crockett replied firmly. "I think you're overlooking the specific legal realities. And I believe this committee needs to hear from people who practice this area of law, not just those who speak about it." The Democratic members of the committee could barely hide their reactions. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was seen on camera trying not to laugh. Representative Jamie Raskin nodded with approval. Even a few Republicans on the panel appeared quietly impressed. Chairman Jordan attempted to push the hearing forward, clearly uneasy with how thoroughly one of his key witnesses had been challenged, but the outcome was already sealed. In just 5 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had completely shifted the balance of authority and made it clear what happens when someone underestimates her. For the rest of the hearing, Kennedy behaved differently. The confident professor-style lecturing about constitutional law disappeared. Instead, he offered short, cautious responses and avoided looking in Crockett's direction. When Chairman Jordan asked whether he wanted to add anything before concluding, Kennedy replied simply, "No, I think that's enough." The cameras documented every second, the shift from confident expert to subdued witness, the realization that he had been outmatched, and the moment Crockett delivered her final point about whose experience mattered most. Before the hearing was even over, video clips of the exchange were going viral. The contrast between Kennedy's dismissive comments and Crockett's pointed rebuttal was perfect for social media. "Jasmine destroys Kennedy" began trending within an hour. The most widely shared clip showed Crockett revealing that Kennedy had argued 0 federal voting rights cases compared to her 14. The second most shared clip featured her closing comments about whose experience was actually relevant. Both videos would reach millions of views, but the biggest viral moment was Kennedy's visible shift in demeanor. Political analysts noted they had rarely seen the normally unflappable senator so completely outmaneuvered. One user summarized it perfectly: "John Kennedy just learned why you don't bring a law degree to a courtroom fight." As the hearing wrapped up, the change was obvious. Kennedy packed up quickly and left without his usual post-hearing media comments. Meanwhile, Crockett was surrounded by colleagues offering congratulations for what many described as one of the most impressive committee takedowns they had witnessed. A Democratic staffer was overheard saying, "I've never seen anyone do that to Kennedy. He looked like he wanted to hide." Even a Republican staffer admitted, "That was brutal. She defeated him using his own arguments." The focus of the hearing had been voting rights legislation, but the conversation afterwards centered on Jasmine Crockett's demonstration of how to handle someone who misjudges you. The immediate reaction to Crockett's dismantling of Kennedy was unlike anything Washington had seen recently. Within minutes of adjournment, political circles were buzzing with commentary and reaction. Before Kennedy even left the Capitol, "Crockett destroys" was trending nationwide on Twitter. Clips circulated rapidly as journalists, analysts, and ordinary viewers shared the moment when the dynamic shifted so dramatically. The most viral clip, which eventually surpassed 10 million views, was a concise 15-second summary. Kennedy lecturing condescendingly about experience, followed instantly by Crockett's pointed line, "You have argued exactly 0 federal voting rights cases." The visual contrast was unforgettable, Kennedy's confidence fading into stunned silence. Political TikTok exploded with reaction videos. Younger activists labeled it the moment a Gen X lawmaker dismantled the old establishment mindset. Legal professionals analyzed Crockett's precise courtroom strategy. Even some conservative commentators acknowledged it was a skillful political exchange. A political science professor's tweet went viral. "This was a perfect example of the difference between credentials and real expertise. Kennedy had the degrees. Crockett had the practical experience." Within hours, major news networks covered the moment. CNN led with, "Freshman Congresswoman dismantles veteran senator in viral exchange." MSNBC described it as, "the day John Kennedy met his match." Even Fox News, typically aligned with Republicans, could not ignore what the footage showed. Coverage focused not only on the exchange itself but also on what it symbolized. Analysts called it a generational turning point, a moment when old assumptions about who deserves authority were openly challenged. Rachel Maddow dedicated a segment to Crockett's preparation and approach, explaining that this was not just a comeback but a lawyer carefully allowing her opponent to set a trap for himself. Chuck Todd noted it was one of the most effective pieces of political communication seen in years, made even more compelling because it was based on real expertise, not performance. Senator Kennedy's attempts to respond to the fallout were quick but ultimately unconvincing. His office released a statement within hours. It said Senator Kennedy stood by his constitutional interpretation and emphasized that experience can come in many forms, not just through case numbers. But the damage had already been done. The statement only made matters worse because it reinforced the same credential-based argument that Crockett had just shown to be weak. Political observers also pointed out that Kennedy's usual post-hearing media spots were cancelled, and his staff declined interview requests about the exchange. He attempted a single appearance on a friendly Louisiana radio program where he tried to minimize what happened. Well, that young lady certainly had her talking points ready, but talking points don't change constitutional law. The comment backfired instantly. Talking points became the new viral phrase, as legal experts quickly noted that Crockett had not been reading from talking points at all. She had been citing her own case record from memory. For Democrats, Jasmine Crockett's performance felt like discovering a political rarity. Here was someone who could challenge the Republicans' strongest communicators and not only hold her ground but outperform them. Party leadership noticed right away. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries issued a pointed statement. Representative Crockett demonstrated the type of expertise and resolve we need in Congress. When Republicans try to dismiss our members, they should expect to be challenged. Progressive fundraising groups reported major increases in donations with Crockett's name attached. Small dollar contributions poured in nationwide, many accompanied by messages such as, "Thanks for standing up to bullies," and finally, "Someone who pushes back effectively." Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posted what many supporters were already thinking. "This is how you respond to condescending men in positions of authority. Take notes." The Republican response was noticeably limited, which itself signaled how significant Kennedy's misstep had been. When a top communicator is overwhelmed, the usual pattern is to defend them publicly. Instead, most Republicans avoided the topic entirely. A few conservative commentators attempted to frame it as Democratic grandstanding, but even those arguments lacked conviction. As one unnamed Republican senator said, "John is usually sharper. He misjudged her and paid for it." The more thoughtful conservative commentary focused on Kennedy's strategic error. He broke the most basic rule of political confrontation. Never assume your opponent is unprepared. He thought he could intimidate a freshman lawmaker and instead found himself confronted by someone with more direct experience in the subject. The legal community's reactions strongly favored Crockett. Law professors used the exchange to highlight the difference between broad legal knowledge and specialized expertise. A Harvard law professor tweeted, "A clear example of why specific experience outweighs general credentials. Crockett understands this law because she has practiced it." The National Bar Association, representing black attorneys, praised Crockett for demonstrating the preparation and depth of knowledge expected from skilled legal advocates. Several legal blogs noted that Crockett's method, allowing Kennedy to set the standards and then showing how she exceeded them, was a classic courtroom strategy. Political analysts added that her performance would likely influence how future hearings are conducted. The old model of using seniority and degrees to pressure junior members had clearly been weakened. A veteran Capitol Hill reporter commented, "People are going to think twice before dismissing a freshman again." Committee chairs were already discussing how to better prepare witnesses for meetings with knowledgeable members of the opposing party. Beyond politics, Crockett's exchange resonated deeply with the public, especially those who had experienced similar moments of being underestimated by people in authority. Comment sections filled with stories from employees, students, and professionals who had been dismissed due to someone else's credentials. A viral post from a young black attorney summarized the sentiment. "Every black woman in corporate America just cheered. We've all had someone try to Kennedy us. Jasmine just showed the right response." Political strategists began assessing the long-term significance of Crockett's moment. To Democrats, she represented a new model of challenging Republican arguments assertively without appearing disrespectful. As one strategist said, "She didn't get emotional. She didn't raise her voice. She simply demonstrated superior knowledge. Others can learn from that." For Republicans, the exchange served as a caution about overconfidence and emphasized the importance of understanding your opponent before entering a public confrontation. The most meaningful long-term effect, however, was on Kennedy himself. For years, he had been one of the GOP's strongest performers in committee hearings, known for making witnesses appear unprepared. But credibility, once questioned, is difficult to fully restore. Future appearances would inevitably be viewed through the lens of the Crockett exchange. His trademark tactic, using a warm, folksy tone to set up assertive questions, had been reversed so effectively that many wondered whether it would ever work the same way again. Some senators privately admitted the exchange reshaped their approach to hearings. One Democratic aide said that committees were now thoroughly researching every member's background before hearings to avoid similar miscalculations. Political observers also noticed Kennedy had become more reserved in later hearings, choosing his targets more carefully and treating his counterparts' potential expertise with more caution. What Jasmine Crockett achieved in that hearing went far beyond undermining John Kennedy. She established a new expectation for preparation in congressional hearings. Seniority and general credentials were no longer enough to intimidate newer members. Crockett demonstrated that specific knowledge, preparation, and strategic thinking could outweigh differences in rank, experience, or academic history. By week's end, Jasmine Crockett had transformed from a freshman representative known mainly in Texas politics to a national figure. She gained over 1 million new social media followers and received invitations to appear on every major political program. But perhaps the clearest sign of her